So, thank you all for being here. Um, you all are helping me do something that's important for me to do before the end of the year. There's a couple of projects to finishing up, and one of them is to get what we might call the second chapter of what would have been a book. So we're doing this like this so it can go on the blog, and then people can access it. And the intent of doing it this way was pretty much a directive from older sister Germaine Sitting Crow. She said a book takes too long, and that she wanted me to do this in a way that would help the people right away. So we're going to talk about a particular kind of medicine that we call Enemy Way. And her intent was to share this medicine. And the other part of this at a more personal level, if this were made into a book, it's very easy to get involved with an expectation of return. Oh, I'm going to read the book, and I'll get money from when people read the book, and I'll be on Oprah when people read the book. So this kind of cuts all that right out of there. People can either listen to it because they like it or not listen to it, and they don't have to buy anything. So in a more pure sense, it's following her directives in a more precise way to act without expectation of return. So the first chapter of the book, so to speak, was Enemy Way, and was a story about this medicine, that we use our enemy as our teachers. And that's what the medicine is about. Because this place where we're doing this is a holistic medical facility, my own predilection and my own orientation is to add in the physical as well as the mental, emotional, and the spiritual with everything. And that was part of her teaching, Sister's teaching, that everything was an act of spirit. So one of the ways that we talked about in using enemy as a teacher was that old teaching story of looking at the camp with the eyes of the enemy instead of as a member of the camp. It gave a different orientation, a different view. And we could learn things we couldn't learn from our familiar view. So the next chapter in the book is really called Making Enemy. And if we can use our enemy and our teacher, and we all have people that we call enemies, there's a process that we go through for making an enemy. And part of this medicine is to acknowledge that process. We do something to make people enemies. And then our enemy can be our teacher if we decide to look at this spiritually. So the first part of the story was enemy as teacher, and the second part of the story is how we individually make enemies. And this seems to be true from what's taught by the old ones for everybody on the planet, every two-legged. And this medicine has two legs because we're two-legged. One leg is awareness and the other is responsibility. So if I want to use my enemy as a teacher, and I'm not in like a combat situation, that's not where we are. I'm living in the world with other people. Then we use the world I'm in to see where I have enemies. Now some of us are very simple. We can drive down the highway and somebody can pull in front of us real quickly and we slam on our brakes, and in a moment we can make them an enemy. We can curse them even. We can say terrible things about them even though we don't know them. So we can make them an enemy that quickly. And that's fairly familiar. The mechanism is what is important for us to see. It's an energetic movement where I can be driving down the street in a good mood and calm and peaceful, and somebody can pull in front of me. And at the moment I make that person an enemy, I'm upset. It has an impact on my physiology, my blood chemistry, my serotonin, my immune system, my relationship with the world. So the how-to of this is first overwhelmed with the consequences. When I make enemy, I'm in a battle state. I'm at war. And some of you that are in relationships with other people know that you can do this with people that you were married to and one day you said that you loved. That may or not have been true at the time, but at least you probably said it. So we're talking about how we can make enemies, and that's part of the responsibility part. The awareness is that I do it if somebody pulls in front of me. Another way I can make enemy is to see something in other people that I react to and I think should be different. And the important word is there, should. So part of this medicine is to look at it, and it could be told in another story. This one is personal. About 2 years ago, there was a contract made with a local craftsman to do some work here at this clinic. And so my plan was to meet him early in the morning and we'd get started. And he never showed and he never called. And when his cell phone was called, he didn't answer it. And so got in touch with somebody that knew him pretty well and found out he wasn't dead. So when I went home that afternoon, the thoughts in my mind were judgmental and critical. I had adjectives that I used about him. Irresponsible, a slacker, doesn't keep his word, which is now dishonest. If you don't keep your word, you're dishonest. So as I repeated these charges, these judgments, these opinions of him, you can imagine it changed my blood chemistry. I wasn't calm. So part of the teaching there at a purely physical level is I keep repeating these things. He did this, he did this, he did this. I create with my judgments. I create something we call anger. Thoughts create emotions. The situation didn't create my emotions, but most of us say the situation does. We say, he upset me, rather than saying my judgments about his behavior created my anger. So this medicine says the responsibility part is to acknowledge that he didn't create my anger. My judgments of him, my cursing him, my name calling, created my emotion and changed my blood chemistry, my physical body. So this guy didn't show up, and later that afternoon went home and I was still thinking about him, even though it was 8 o'clock in the morning that we were supposed to do this. Like at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, still thinking about the dude, and not in a kind way. Thinking about when I get home, I'm going to call him, that's sorry, fill in the blank. So when I got home, looked at my desk, my paperwork, and my goodness, there were some insurance forms there that I hadn't seen, that had been there since November, and this was August, you know. Somebody had asked me to fill out their insurance forms before Thanksgiving in November. And they've been on my desk without my awareness, so to speak. Every day I could look at my desk, and I didn't see these. Like I censored that, where I didn't keep my word, where I wasn't responsible, where I didn't do what I said I was going to do, and that I wasn't dead either, and my arm wasn't broken, and I could have done it. So that very afternoon that I go home, full of anger and judgment and an upset stomach about this guy, wondering what's the matter with him and thinking all kind of thoughts about him, all of a sudden these insurance papers that had been there since November caught my eye, so to speak. Well, actually, we would say that none of this is random or chaotic, but this was an act of spirit, that this is how spirit acts. Spirit has people play certain roles. And if I choose to use my enemy as my teacher, this gentleman that I'd made an enemy by cursing, putting down, character assassination, I made him enemy. I changed my blood chemistry. I created distance between he and I. I judged him. Judgment creates anger. Thoughts create emotions. Emotions ignored create feelings in the body. Feelings in the body ignored seem to create symptoms. Symptoms ignored seem to create disease. So this is a connection in a holistic way in this medicine. And this is what the sister and the teacher wanted me to make sure that people had available, to look at everything as an act of spirit. So the guy that didn't show up helped me wake up to something that was true about me that I had ignored since November, and it was August. So in this medicine, we choose to look at everything that way, that we even pray. If we ever prayed to be a better person, then we think these kind of things are going to happen. The Spirit's going to show us. And usually Spirit uses everybody else, our relationships. So you see my relationship with this guy changed when I began to judge him, and so did my blood chemistry. So if you believe in reap what you sow, that's a pretty good shot right there. It looks like the results are instantaneous too. So you could probably imagine if I have a whole book of people that I'm judging all of the time, or happen to be married to somebody that it's easy to judge, then I could be upset a lot. Now there's another part to this story, a story within a story. The most amazing thing occurred in this teaching story. After I saw the insurance papers and I realized, I woke up a little bit, I said, wow, I'm doing what I'm judging him for. Holy cow. But for 6 months it's been okay when I do it. Well, it hadn't been that long, but for a few months. November, December, January, February. Oh, it's longer than I thought, maybe 9 months. So it was okay for me to do it for almost a year, but it wasn't okay for him to do it at 8 o'clock that morning. So we call that humility training. It tends to shrink the ego, but we say that's a good thing because the ego shrinks and the self-esteem goes up. They look like a seesaw. The higher my self-esteem, the smaller my ego. It's inverse. So, as I'm looking at this, a most amazing discovery that was really obvious anyway, when my thoughts about him were not judgmental, when I realized that I was doing the same thing he did and I made it okay somehow, and I even screened out the insurance papers, once that awareness came, the next awareness was the thoughts in my mind that were judgmental were about me. So I started off judging him. What a sorry son of a gun, he doesn't keep his word. And then as soon as I realized I was doing the same thing, then those judgments were aimed at me. So that's the awareness there, that the voice of my mind judges him, and the voice of my mind, when he's not around, judge me. So then, in this medicine we're looking at, if this is the way it works, and we say things like, I judge myself, we're saying something like, I, on the left hand, judge myself on the right hand, and you can imagine that's two hands. So which one is really me? The I that judges the self, or the self that gets judged? So in this medicine, that's a basic question. Who are we? Are we the voice of judgment? I judge myself. If that's true, who is the self? Or are we the self, the one that suffers from the judgment? So in this medicine, we say we are the self. And the voice that judges everybody else and the voice that judges me lives in my mind. And in this medicine, it requires us to look at that. It's part of the medicine. It's called awareness. And in this medicine, the old teacher said even that the amount the voice in my mind judges the world is the same amount it judges me. That those two were equal, like yin-yang, east-west. It also said that the amount that the voice judges me is how much the voice judges other people. Now the old teacher has also said that it's impossible to stop the voice from judging other people until we deal with the voice that judges us. So sometimes people say they hear that medicine from the Jesus man that says, judge not. And they apply one half of it working to not judge outside. And it appears in this medicine we also want to look at the other side, east and west, male, female, upside, up, down, born, die. We look at both sides in this medicine. So we look at, if I can be aware, of how much I judge the world, I can begin to look at the I that judges. Who is that? Now part of this medicine points to something very basic by saying when children are little, from age 0 up to about 2.5, the I doesn't exist. There is no self-judgment. There's also no judgment of other children. They don't care if their friends are fat or skinny or rich or poor or black or white. So somebody gives them this I, and we think it's a false identity. In this medicine goes even further and says, if my awareness expands enough that the I that judges me is beginning to be noticed, then what's noticed obviously is that voice, like I judge myself. The I is cruel to me. The I is critical. We understand that criticism changes serotonin, changes the immune system. We know with children, when they're criticized, their immune system drops and their serotonin drops because those two lines run parallel in the body. When the immune system's high, the serotonin's high. When the serotonin's high, the immune's, back and forth, both sides. So we acknowledge that in little people, that when they're judged a lot, with some very simple Sig-A tests, the immune factor in the mouth, we can tell their serotonin goes down. So somebody teaches us to judge ourselves. And the intent is not to judge them, to make an enemy out of them. The intent is only to understand that when we were little, we didn't have the I that criticized everything that I do. We didn't have the self-critic. So some people say that's part of the other medicine, to be as children to enter the kingdom of heaven, to be without self-judgment and to be without judging other people. Now the holistic or the medical part of this that we emphasize here in this facility is to acknowledge that judgment of other people creates distance, disharmony, anger. We acknowledge here that self-judgment creates shame and a word we call guilt. Now the important part of this in this medicine is not so much what's created, but to acknowledge that judgment creates. The judgment creates, that it's very, very powerful. So if my relationship with someone is judgmental and critical, then there's distance in that relationship. Intimacy is impossible with judgment. So maybe people could even say, and Sister would venture, that the judgment and love were opposite, not love and hate. She saw judgment as an act we perform that we were taught to do, that we look at the world through the eyes of judgment, that everything is compared, good or bad, right or wrong, everything. And the children's eyes before age 2.5, to look at the world without judgment, that their eyes were true windows to the world, and that we lose that as we take up judgment. So all these words really mean is, in this medicine, we think if we become aware of that, we next must decide, are we interested in intimacy and peace inside the body and outside in relationships? And are we willing to give up judgment? So one of the ways, if we're willing to give up judgment, if we don't like it when other people judge us, for example, and if we're willing to give up judgment because we don't like it when other people do it to us, that would involve becoming aware again, that word awareness, of how much the voice in my mind does judge. So these are awareness movements. They're designed to discover how much energy is invested in self-judgment or judgment of other people. In other words, creating enemies. So to make sort of a circle in this story, perhaps you can see that the gentleman that didn't show up for the 8 o'clock appointment was holding up a mirror for me of something I was doing that I was asleep to. There was no awareness on my part. I had ignored those insurance papers for months, and they were right there on my desk. So that took some censoring, because the papers were always there. They didn't just show up that afternoon. My vision cleared up that afternoon. The possibility is, for me, that the prayer, Creator, let me see what's going on. There's an awareness of a lot of anger and judgment to this man. Help me see what this is about. That prayer cleared up my vision, and I saw those insurance papers on the desk. From Sister's view, that would be looking at everything as a spiritual endeavor. Like, what is this doing in my life? Instead of it's a mistake and Creator made a mistake, which we think is an oxymoron, Creator can't make mistakes. We kind of have that as a baseline. That if Spirit's running the show, then Spirit's running the show, and to say Spirit makes mistakes is kind of crazy. We also think that's the ultimate in what we call self-importance, where I think I know what's going on or what's supposed to go on. And I actually know the schedule that it's supposed to go on too. So we think that's self-importance. So a corollary here, if I really wanted to give up some judgment, I would need to be aware of my judgment and make some choices. If I'm unaware of how much I judge, there's no choice. And a corollary, I might find out if judgment doesn't create the kind of life that I want, knowing that judgment creates. The corollary is, am I willing to give up self-importance? That would mean that if I become aware of I'm judging other people, I would also be willing to say, if I stop judging them, I would also be willing to say that I don't know how they should be. I can't say how they should be. I have trouble living up to what I want to be. So it would be really presumptuous to say, I know how other people should behave. But in this medicine, we're saved by the bell, so to speak, because we think the person we're with is going to behave in a perfect way to force us to look at something, like that man did by not showing up at 8 o'clock in the morning. And for me, what he forced me to look at was really important. It's an important part of my spiritual growth. To look, how often do I keep my word? How often do I say, yeah, I'll do it, and I have no intention of doing it? Or I block it out? Or I do this weird thing of saying, I forget. So in our family, when our grandchildren say, I forget, we sort of disallow that. We don't argue with them about it or yell them about it. We say things like, you chose not to remember that. And one of my feisty granddaughters puts her hand on her hip and says, no, Papa, I forgot. I said, well, granddaughter, we think that you remember your birthday. And she says, of course, Papa. And I remember when Christmas is. What are you going to get me? And she remembers all kind of good stuff. So we think she remembers what she wants to remember. So if I think that about her, oh my goodness, what does that mean about me? Well, it's the same truth. So we sort of drop the word forget. We don't say, oh, I forgot, and hold our hands out like we're helpless. We don't do that. We say, I chose not to remember that. That's the truth. There's nothing wrong with my memory. I remember to put on pants before I came over here. My memory works good. I remember where my office is. My memory's fine. So that's taking responsibility. And that tends to shrink our ego a bit, which builds our self-esteem. So if we're in relationship, or we've been in relationship, or we want to be in relationship, we could look at, if we wanted to, what that person is going to help us see. Like if I'm in relationship with somebody and I react to something they do, I get to see my reactions. And if like that gentleman at 8 o'clock that morning was really sent by Spirit to make me see where I didn't keep my word, one of the ways I can tell a spiritual teacher is I react to them. Maybe I even begin to judge them. So if you can look at it that way, can you imagine the terrible things you called your spiritual teachers? You may have called them terrible names. Somebody pulled in front of you to teach you about your self-importance, and you may have called them all kind of terrible names. One of your children might stick their chin in the air and refuse to cooperate and stamp their feet and act spoiled, and you may say terrible things about that kid. I hear women laughing over there. You have a child you do that with, maybe. Ah. Well, you're sitting right under Sister's picture there, so it's really good. Yeah. She always asks me, how do you behave if you don't get what you want? I said, why are you asking me that? I mean, I'm a grown man. Why are you asking me that? So, I think I know why she was asking me that. So this medicine involves being aware and being responsible. And the way we become aware is through our body, through our physical reactions. We take responsibility for saying that we react. We can feel it. We can feel our reaction. Now the reason we tend to use our body in an enemy way is because our mind will lie to us. Our mind will say, I'm not reacting, that person is a terrible person. Everybody thinks they're a terrible person. I'll even gather evidence that they're a terrible person. I had all kind of evidence why this workman was just a complete jerk. And I've used him 10 other times and been really satisfied. But that time negated everything good. Boom. Everything good was gone. So imagine if people do that with me. Oh my goodness, that'd be funny. Sometimes my grandchildren do that with me. The little one says, right now, Papa, I don't like you. Oh, tell me how come you don't like me? You're not listening to me and doing it my way, Papa. I said, oh my goodness, this is a grandchild. Where did she learn this stuff? And then I go sit with my son and daughter-in-law and I go, oh my goodness, where did they learn this stuff? And I go in the bathroom and look in the mirror and I say, what have you done? And then I go out in the living room and there's that granddaughter with her hand on her hip telling me how I should be. And it's a female telling me how I should be. So I get to think, my goodness, here I am reacting to this 3-foot-tall person. The same way I react to my daughter-in-law and the lady I was married to and my mother-in-law. Oh my goodness, they're all females and they all got their hand on their hip telling me how I should be. And it's a staggering thought that all of these are my spiritual teachers that play this role for me to see how I act, how I feel. What are the thoughts in my mind if I'm with a woman and she's critical? If she just doesn't approve of me, what goes on with me? So I have all these women helping me learn this. I'm blessed. Yes. So this stuff, you can see if I don't look at the world this way, I'll make an enemy out of all these women. I won't want to be around them. I'll think they should be different. I'll have ideas of how they should be different. I'll want them to be different so I'm more comfortable. Can you imagine that? All of these women, the grandmas and the children and the grandchildren, and one of my grandchildren is close enough that I might even be a great-grandpa here within soon. Not too soon. But anyway, it's possible. It'd be good. So I get to see all this, and the other choice I seem to have is to follow the program I was given as a little child, the program of looking at the world through the eyes of judgment, criticizing, comparing, judging, making enemy. So to make another circle, in this medicine, we look for who and what we make enemy. The craftsman, the guy, the workman, I made him an enemy till I got home and saw the papers. When I saw the papers, then the voice of my mind started to judge me. So we're back again to I judge me. Who is the I? Who is that? In this medicine, in this holistic medicine, we think that I the one that judges me, creates many of my emotions. If you can imagine talking this way, and this is how a lot of people talk, and we have some interest in changing this, a very normal way of talking is to say, I judge myself. So we might say, if we follow that, since judgment creates guilt and shame, I create the emotion of guilt and shame. Psychology and psychiatry says, my history creates my guilt and shame. This medicine says, the voice of judgment that lives in my mind creates my guilt and shame. So this medicine has us begin to look at that voice as a creator of suffering. So now, besides having enemies outside, people I react to and judge, I understand that that voice in my mind is acting like my enemy. I have a voice in my mind that creates guilt and shame. We know medically that when people feel a lot of guilt and shame, their serotonin is low. And if they go to a psychiatrist or a certain kind of MD, they may give them a serotonin reuptake inhibitor drug to try to keep the serotonin high. In this medicine, we think it's a nice corollary to have the person begin to look at how much self-judgment is going on. In other words, to look at the enemy that lives in their mind. The way Sister would say it, because of her tradition and her culture, is to understand there's an enemy in my camp. The other part that's another level of this is to understand that my relationship with that voice in my mind will be perfectly mirrored by people outside of me. That's kind of a weird thought. So a young couple with a 2.5-year-old came in the other day, and they were both saying, this kid of ours is so impatient. This child, as if she doesn't get what she wants, when she wants it, she screams and throws a fit. This child thinks the world revolves around her. Can you imagine that? So yes, I can. Looking at the mom and dad, it wasn't too hard to imagine. Because before they had the child, they were here for premarital therapy. And the husband said things to the wife, well, if you don't do this, I'm not going to be happy and I'm going to throw a fit. And the wife said things to the husband, well, if you do this, I'm going to throw a fit. I won't speak to you for 3 days. How about that? And that they did this a lot. And we talked about that in marital therapy, that they can do that, but they may have learned that from people that they really didn't want to emulate anymore. And they remember where they learned that way of interacting. They were staggered to realize they were interacting the way the people that they didn't like were interacting. So that then their choice was to act like they were with people that they really did love. Family therapists decided to do this really basic thing and write out these little flashcards for husband and wives that came in for therapy. And the card said, please treat me like somebody you love. So when somebody was screaming at somebody, one of them would whip out the card and says, treat me like somebody you love. You know, we're here to repair this. So this was going on. They were looking at the kid, and we were talking about where could the kid have learned this? And so mom and dad were using their kid as a mirror. And mom and dad were both saying, you know, this is going on right now. It's a busy time of year. The lady's a professional person, and she's really busy. And all year long, she's prayed to be really busy in her business. She's building her business. So she's really busy, and she's really angry that she's really busy. She's just annoyed as she can be that she's really busy. Has all these clients when she didn't, you know. A year ago, she was begging for clients. And here they are. She's acting just like her daughter. And the husband is doing the same thing. He's also a professional man. And he has all this work right now. And he's really profitable. He's more profitable than he's ever been in his whole life. And he's prayed to be profitable, make a good living for his family. And his wife is annoying, and his kid is annoying, and his customers are annoying. And it's all them. If they were different, he'd be happy. Well, the sad part is he's made an enemy out of his wife. He's made an enemy out of his daughter. And he's made an enemy out of his customers. And he's done it with this simple act of judgment. The one that Jesus, man, we think was trying to warn people about when he said, judge not. This isn't the Jesus way medicine. It does overlap with that. The old ones who came from this continent that started this medicine understood that our thoughts create our emotions and our reality. And to be responsible for our thoughts is to begin to retrain the enemy in our mind. So hopefully it's clear the enemy we're talking about is the one we call I. I judge myself. I hang on to my history. I compare everything to what bad happened 5 years ago. I do that. I create a reality. And in this medicine, we take responsibility for that. And we take responsibility for that before we try to change the world. We say we seem to have an enemy in our mind that treats us the same way we treat the world or the way we feel treated by the world. And this medicine says we're responsible for changing that. Actually, that nobody else can change it. Nobody can change my mind. I can go to a shrink and get drugs that'll numb me or quiet my mind some or bring up my serotonin if I feel better for a while. This medicine adds in maybe facing the I, the one who judges. So another example, another little story within a story about this medicine is everybody here is old enough to understand that we could lie in bed at night and the heater or the air conditioning, I guess the heater this time of year, is working well and the windows are closed and the doors are locked and there's some money in the jeans and there's some gas in the truck and food in the refrigerator. In other words, all of those things outside of me are fine. Nobody's shooting at me. Nobody's yelling at me. I'm really okay. My bed is good. And we're acknowledging the medicine we're talking about is the voice in my mind that keeps me awake, even though everything around me is good. Because nothing on the outside is keeping me awake. No body is keeping me awake. There's a voice in my mind that's talking. The Buddhist people call it the chattering monkey. So they think meditation is to quiet the chattering monkey. That medicine is from over the big water. That's from over the ocean. The medicine here is to stalk that voice, the enemy that lives in my mind. The voice that keeps me awake when my body wants to go to sleep. The enemy that lives within. To stalk that and leave other people alone. Hopefully you can see that we use other people to find that. To repeat a story, but to make a circle. When the craftsman, the workman didn't show up, the voice in my mind, my thoughts were judgmental about him. Outward, outward, outward. He's the problem, he's the problem, he's the problem. When there was a little waking up that went on, realizing the insurance papers were from November and it was August, and some awareness came and some responsibility, then the next thing that happened is the voice in my mind began to judge me. So if we look at it as a spiritual challenge, every moment brings me an opportunity for awareness, for waking up, then we could say, at this level, if I really believe that the voice in my mind can create shame, guilt, anger, fear, anxiety, then I understand that not the world creates those things. The voice in my mind talking about the world creates those things. We're talking about people. The voice of my mind talked about the craftsman and created anger. So if I'm willing to accept that, the next move is that gentleman that didn't show up at 8 o'clock in the morning gave me this huge gift of later that afternoon finding how that voice that judged him turned on me after there was some awareness. Same voice, same judgment. So it was clear that afternoon that the amount that voice judged him, that voice was absolutely overjoyed to judge me for not filling out the papers. So it became a challenge to deal with that voice, to face the voice that creates the suffering. Since the world doesn't create the suffering, the world doesn't create my anxiety. The enemy that lives within me, the voice of my mind that was put in me when I was little and innocent. And we say nobody can make that voice go away other than the owner. And actually in this medicine, we don't think you can even make the voice go away. We don't want to make it go away. The voice is a good servant and a terrible master. The voice can be used. The voice that was judging the craftsman forced me to look at the voice. So our intent with this medicine is to look at the voice and to transform it from a voice of judgment, from an enemy into an ally. That the voice of my mind is supportive and loving. That my thoughts are supportive and loving. And in this medicine, we think that has a component of physical well-being. It's like Sister would say, peace is the highest value. So in this weird way with this medicine, we can say that we're using our enemies to find peace. And as we get down to it, our enemies are only showing me the enemy that lives in my mind. So I might be in a relationship where somebody acts towards me in a certain way, and I could say, my goodness, they are unloving. They're critical. They're trying to control me. It's possible for me to say that about the voice of my mind, that it's unloving, it's critical, it's trying to control me. And the truth is, if I listen to that voice, to those judgments, I am indeed controlled. My thoughts are controlled, my energy is controlled, my immune system, my serotonin, my relationships. In the simplest way, if I believe my judgments about somebody, I limit how close I can get to them. That's very controlling. And I also limit how close they can get to me, for sure. If I'm judgmental of somebody, they can't get close to me. There's nothing they can do. It's an invisible wall, but it's incredibly powerful. So part of this medicine is to look for when we judge and how much we judge, and to maybe take that as a mirror of how much the enemy in our mind judges us. And we may be with somebody that shows us that wonderfully. Now there's this risky part of all of this. If I decide to look at everybody as a mirror, like that craftsman, then I end up not having complaints about people. And then I'm either with the person because I want to be, or I'm not with them because I don't want to be. It's not because I need them. So my relationship with people changes if I'm less reactive to them. It's a very strange thing. It doesn't seem linear. And maybe it's not. Maybe it's just right brain. It doesn't make sense. But the less I react to somebody, then I begin to see how much I really feel about it. It's a very strange thing. Hookah, welcome. Now everybody gets a chance to see if you react to him coming in late. A way to do that would be to see if you could catch a judgment. Since this is not being videotaped, everybody can kind of check it out for yourself. If we use everything as a teaching moment, and that's sort of what we're talking about as you walked in. You're a great help. I was just talking about how somebody I reacted to was helping me wake up to my reactions and to what we call my self-judgment. And that we can be in a relationship with someone who we might see as very critical and judgmental. And that might lead us through this movement to understanding that we're very self-critical. And where we've gotten to in the talk so far is we're looking at the part that is criticizes us. Who is that? And we're acknowledging that in our educational system, through elementary and high school and maybe even college, that no one has ever addressed who that is. No one has ever said to us, if you say you judge yourself, if you say I judge myself, who is the I that judges you? Who is that? It sounds like there's two people there. Which one's real? So we may have gone to college and even studied psychology, and maybe even gotten a doctorate in psychology, or maybe be an MD, a psychiatrist, and never consider that there's a voice in my mind that's been given a name called I, and that voice in my mind acts like an enemy rather than an ally. So the part of the sister's medicine that she emphasized all the time was my reactions to people are an act of spirit trying to show me something. And if I take it as a mistake, or I want to live up in a cave to avoid people, then I'm not getting it. And her insistence was for me to be around people and do things like we're doing here today. To share what she shared as her medicine. In her world, everything was an act of spirit. There was nothing that could happen in the world of creation that wasn't within the domain of Creator. So this medicine is part of that. So one of the ways that we use this medicine is we look for who we react to instead of trying to avoid who we react to. And then the other part is we tell ourselves the truth. How much we react, when we react. And then if we want to, we can go to the next step. Like if I, in a relationship, and I say, this person I'm with is very critical of me. I could say, I can begin to look at where I'm critical of her. Of course, the voice in my mind wants to say, well, if she'd stop, I'd stop. Means if she went first, if she's different, then I'll be different. So that's where the voice of my mind wants me to stay. If she's different, I'll be different. Now part of this medicine comes in weird ways. Over Thanksgiving, got to spend some time with family, and one of our family members had a medical incident recently and is still pretty involved in doing some things that don't look real healthy. And this person's spouse, we're sitting around the table after Thanksgiving, and says to me, well, the more I nag him, the more he drinks. And I said, whoa, got it. She said, well, what do I do? And I said, well, you just told me what to do. She said, no, seriously, tell me what to do. I said, well, you just told me the more you nag him, the more he drinks. And she said, oh, you're talking about not nagging him. I said, I thought that's what you're telling me. The more you nag him, the more he drinks. Well, I can't quit nagging him because then he'll keep drinking. So I understand that. So her mom was sitting at the table with us, and I got to see where she learned this way of interacting with husbands. That if you nag them a lot, then maybe they'll be different. So, she was a good teacher for me. If everything is an act of spirit, walked out of the room and thinking about, I must do that somewhere. I must know what to do, and absolutely refuse to do it. I must want the world to change first. I must do that. This woman acted this right out in front of me. This had to be an act of spirit. Besides that, it caught my attention. I'm still thinking about it. So it's definitely got to be an act of spirit. I've walked 2 miles down the road and I'm still thinking about this. So this is clearly for me. So hopefully you can see that part of the medicine. If my energy is hooked with something, that's a funny way to talk, but let's say my energy is engaged, then that belongs to me. That's mine. Now it may have been for them too. There's no denying that. For me, that was real important to see that. And perhaps you can imagine walking down the road thinking about all that. It wasn't too hard to find places where what to do is very clear. That wasn't hard to find. You know, like doing yoga every morning. And it doesn't matter how I feel about yoga that I don't like yoga. What matters is when I do the yoga, then I walk better the rest of the day. I'm limber and everything goes better. Yoga is really good that way. It took a long time for me to understand my dislike or liking of yoga had nothing to do with it. Yoga does what yoga said it would do. And so the question is, do I do the yoga? It's not the yoga's question. It does what it says it will do. Do I do what I know how to do? So it was easy to find places where I know what to do and I don't do it. And then if you make a circle, the next move in here is to address the part of me that won't, that knows what to do and won't do it. That's the same part that we're talking about here with all of this. This is the I and the mind. So sometimes we call this voice, if I say I judge myself, I create anxiety, I create fear, I create guilt, shame. This voice, the I, we sometimes call the shadow side, the dark side of our nature, the part of us that creates suffering for us. And we think part of this spiritual journey is to look at where we do that with people. We think that it's really obvious that when I judge myself, I create suffering. Whoever I is creates suffering within my physical body. I create suffering emotionally if I judge me. I create guilt or shame. So to look at the I is an important part of this medicine. And if it's difficult to find that, we can look at how we react to other people. And if we find that it's difficult to stay in touch with our body and notice when we react to people, if we get pretty far down the road with the judgments, we can look at when we begin to call people names, when we begin to describe them, when we begin to make up stories about them, when we begin to diagnose them. We may even prescribe a treatment for them. Some of us do that. We decide we know what's wrong with other people and then we prescribe. Well, if they would just get their act together. So the weird thing about this medicine is the way that it was taught is whatever the I in me wants to prescribe for other people, to go ahead and write that down. You know, like a script. Like a prescription, to write it down and then administer it to myself and then see how I am with the other people. So if I think that you should stop judging, then I'll write that down as a prescription. But instead of your name on it, I'll put my name on it. And then I get to see this weird thing. Will I do it? Will I do what I think is good for you to do? Or will I just decide you should do it? So we call that our self-importance. And in this medicine, we think our self-importance is an enemy also, because our self-importance keeps us away from other people. So some people we might want to stay away from. Another interesting story is a while ago a young woman came in, and her mama brought her in because they were fighting a lot. The young lady was 15, and she and her mom were fighting a lot, and her mom brought her in and got to explore some stuff with the young lady. And she was pretty quick. She said that the more her mom judges her, the more rebellious she is. And we used that, and she found out that she was pretty self-critical. And for a 15-year-old female in our culture, that's not particularly weird. It was helpful to her to realize that she was self-critical, and that when other people were critical, she was very reactive, got very angry. So a lot of the anger disappeared as she began to take responsibility for her self-criticism. And she told me, well, I'm just going to give up judgment. And my thought was, good luck with that. And so she came back about a month later. We had separated our appointments out after a while. And she said, discover something. I said, well, tell me. She said, when boys are bothering me and I don't want them to bother me, judgment works really good. They leave me alone immediately. As soon as I judge them, they leave me alone. They go away. I realize I use my judgment to keep people away from me. She said, and it's a really good tool. She said, how am I going to give it up if I still use it? I said, well, a smart young woman you are. I have that same question. How am I going to give this up if I'm in love with the effects of it? If I use this tool to keep people away from me and to keep my self-importance intact and to think that I'm right, and at the same time I say I want to give up self-judgment and judgment of other people, I put myself in a trap here. And that's a pretty worthwhile trap because it forces me to look at my dilemma. If I want peace, will I give up war? That's how Sister would always say it to me. In this lifetime, it seems pretty clear to me that becoming a sun dancer and a pipe carrier is something that never would have been in my life without her. And to be a pipe carrier, the demand is peace, not war. So in our context, if I want to get along with people, will I give up judging them? So for her, that was judgment creates war. You can't have war without judgment. You can't create distance without judgment. In this medicine, a physician might say, it's difficult to create anxiety or fear or anger without judgment. And we would agree. Thoughts create emotions. Emotions create feelings. So in her view of the world, it was very simple. She has no enemies because all of her enemies become her teachers and her dear friends. So some of us are looking at that as maybe a really nice intention, to be in the world with no enemies. Some of us, speaking for myself, are at the place where it's important to look at how many enemies we make and how we do that. And then we blame other people for that. So this is sort of the end of this chapter. The second chapter of what's not a book, as part of a blog, is how we make enemies. And a quick summation is we make enemies through the act of judgment. And the amount that we judge the world is the same amount that the voice in our mind judges us. And all of this medicine is designed to get us to the point where we're looking at that voice. We're facing the enemy in our mind. And then the next part of that is, what are my relationships with the world and other people if my interior relationship is one of peace, not war? This is a way of saying I can't be at peace with the world if there's no peace inside. And then we have this beautiful benefit of being in the world with other people who will show us what we react to. They'll hold it up for us. So if I'm with somebody and it looks like they just won't take care of themselves, Is there some place where I just won't take care of myself? This medicine says you can always find that answer if we're willing to look at ourselves. So I want to thank you all for being here and helping me do this. As usual, what's going to be said about this is never very clear, and having you all here helps this medicine come out. For me, it's important to say that Sister would say to me over and over and over, if you can teach this medicine in a clear way and help the people with this medicine, you have a chance of getting it for yourself. So I thank you all for that opportunity. It's good to be here and do this, to act without expectation of return. And I thank your help in recording it, and your help getting it on the blog and getting this in the world. So thank each of you for coming. I hope it was worth your time.